A restaurant manager confidently refused service to a casually dressed man, only to discover later that she had just turned away one of the most powerful people in the world, Elon Musk. What happened next left everyone speechless. Instead of anger, Musk responded with a lesson in humility, bias, and second chances, one that shook the entire community. The lunch rush at Delaney's Bistro was in full swing. The elegant downtown Austin restaurant prided itself on exclusivity, catering to high-profile clients, business professionals, and well-dressed socialites. The sound of clinking glasses, hushed conversations, and the occasional laugh filled the air as waiters in crisp uniforms navigated the floor with practiced efficiency. At the front podium, Margaret Delaney, the restaurant's general manager, surveyed the dining room with sharp, calculating eyes. With over a decade of experience in fine dining, Margaret had built a reputation for being strict, efficient, and unwavering in her high standards. Her goal was simple: maintain the restaurant's image at all costs. Margaret believed that the wrong type of customer could disrupt the refined atmosphere she worked so hard to preserve. She had turned away guests before, those who didn't meet the dress code, those who appeared too rowdy, and those who, in her mind, simply didn't fit the bistro's brand. She was proud of this selectivity. It was, after all, what separated Delaney's Bistro from the chain restaurants down the block. As she scanned the room, the glass doors swung open and a man stepped inside. He was tall, casually dressed, and wore a red baseball cap with bold white letters, "Make America Great Again." Margaret stiffened. The relaxed posture, the hat, the contrast against the restaurant's polished clientele, it all set off an immediate alarm in her mind. She had dealt with customers like this before, and in her experience they brought nothing but trouble. Straightening her blazer, Margaret instinctively turned to her assistant manager, Chris, and whispered, "Watch this one. Let's not entertain any trouble today." She had no idea who she was dealing with. The man approached the host stand with a calm, easy demeanor, scanning the restaurant as if simply appreciating the ambiance. He carried a black leather briefcase in one hand, his other resting casually in his pocket. His attire, dark jeans, a fitted jacket, and the unmistakable red MAGA cap, stood out starkly in the sea of pressed suits and designer dresses. Margaret immediately stepped forward, her expression neutral but her decision already made. This wasn't the kind of customer Delaney's Bistro catered to. She had seen what happened when political symbols entered refined spaces like this: arguments, complaints, tension between guests. It wasn't worth the risk. The man nodded politely. "Good afternoon. I'd like a table for one, please." Margaret offered a tight-lipped smile, already preparing her response. "I'm sorry, sir, but we're fully booked for the afternoon." She gestured vaguely toward the dining room, though several empty tables were clearly visible. The man's brows lifted slightly, but he remained composed. "That's interesting. I don't see a reservation list in front of you." His tone wasn't confrontational, just observant. Margaret kept her expression firm. "We have a private event today." There it was. The excuse she often used when she needed a quick, indisputable way to turn someone away. The man tilted his head slightly, studying her. "A private event?" He glanced around, noting the casually seated diners, the absence of any event signage. "That's funny. I just watched two people walk in without a reservation." Margaret's grip on the host stand tightened. "Sir, we reserve the right to refuse service, at our discretion. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." A few nearby guests had begun to notice the exchange. Some exchanged quiet glances, while others pretended not to listen. Chris, the assistant manager, stood nearby, shifting uncomfortably. For a moment the man simply studied Margaret, as if deciding whether to push back or let it go. Finally, with an almost imperceptible nod, he reached for his briefcase. "Understood," he said simply. He adjusted his cap, turned, and walked out. Margaret exhaled, expecting relief. Instead, she felt uneasy. Most people would have argued, raised their voice, demanded to speak to corporate, but this man? He had simply left, calm, controlled, and without a word of protest. For some reason that unsettled her more than if he had caused a scene. The following evening, Delaney's bistro was as busy as ever. The usual clientele, business executives, socialites, and politicians, filled the dimly lit dining room, their conversations blending into a steady hum of clinking glasses and silverware. Margaret Delaney had put the previous day's encounter out of her mind, dismissing the man in the MAGA hat as just another instance of maintaining the restaurant's exclusivity. Then, at precisely 7 p.m., the restaurant doors swung open. A hush fell over the room almost instantly. The same man from the day before walked inside, but this time he wasn't alone. Flanking him were two sharply dressed men in tailored suits, their presence immediately commanding attention. Their demeanor, the quiet but undeniable authority in their movements, sent a ripple through the restaurant. Margaret, standing behind the host stand, felt her stomach drop. There was something different this time. The man still wore the same red hat, the same casual confidence, but the way he carried himself, as if he owned the room without needing to say a word, made her uneasy. Chris, the assistant manager, leaned toward her and whispered, "Margaret, that's Elon Musk." Margaret froze. The name hit her like a freight train. She blinked, her brain racing to process what she had just heard. Elon Musk, the Tesla CEO, the billionaire entrepreneur? Her eyes darted back to the man in front of her, and suddenly she saw it. The unmistakable features. The same face that had graced magazine covers, business interviews, and global headlines. The man she had dismissed and turned away the day before was one of the most influential people on the planet. Margaret felt her pulse pound in her ears. She had denied service to Elon Musk. Elon, however, remained calm, unbothered. He approached the host's stand, slowly removed his cap, and placed it on the podium in front of her. The embroidered white letters, "Make America Great Again," stared up at her like a challenge. "Let's talk," he said simply. The restaurant had gone eerily quiet. Every pair of eyes was on them. Some diners had pulled out their phones, discreetly recording what was clearly becoming an unexpected public moment. Margaret swallowed hard, trying to regain composure. "Mr. Musk, He raised a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. "No need for an introduction," he said smoothly. "You made yourself very clear yesterday." Margaret's mouth went dry. The very authority she prided herself on, the control she always had over this space, was suddenly slipping away. She had been prepared to turn away a regular customer. She had not been prepared for this. The air inside Delaney's bistro had shifted. The once buzzy hum of conversation had faded into absolute silence. Every diner now focused on the unexpected confrontation unfolding at the front of the restaurant. Margaret Delaney stood frozen, her carefully maintained confidence unraveling as she stared at Elon Musk, the man she had so easily dismissed the day before. Elon, however, remained composed. He didn't look angry. He didn't raise his voice. He simply studied Margaret for a moment, then slowly turned his attention to the watching crowd. "Yesterday I walked into this restaurant as just another customer," he began, his voice steady but deliberate. "I wasn't loud. I wasn't disruptive. I wasn't demanding special treatment. I just wanted a meal." His words hung in the air, and Margaret could feel the weight of every single pair of eyes on her. "But before I even had a chance to sit down, I was turned away." Elon lifted the red MAGA hat from the counter and held it up. "Because of this." A few quiet murmurs rippled through the diners. Some people shifted in their seats, suddenly uneasy. Others watched, intrigued. Margaret opened her mouth, desperate to justify herself. "Mr. Musk, Elon shook his head, cutting her off without even raising his voice. "No need to explain. I know exactly why you turned me away. You made a decision based on an assumption." He placed the hat back down on the counter. "And I'm not here to argue. I'm here to talk about why that matters." Margaret's throat tightened. She had spent years making quick judgments, deciding who belonged in her restaurant and who didn't. But now, standing in front of one of the world's most powerful men, she realized how fragile that judgment really was. Elon turned to the crowd again. "I want everyone to think about something," he continued. "How often do we judge people before we even know them? How often do we assume we understand someone's story just because of a hat, a shirt, an accent, or a name? He gestured toward a young waitress standing nearby. "You," he said, his voice still calm but commanding. "What's your name?" The waitress, a nervous-looking girl named Lena, hesitated before answering. "Lena, sir." Elon nodded. "Lena, if someone came in wearing something you didn't like, would you treat them differently?" Lena swallowed hard, glancing at Margaret before answering. I try to treat everyone the same," she said carefully. Elon smiled slightly. "That's a good answer. But it's not always that easy, is it?" Lena looked down, shifting uncomfortably. Margaret felt her stomach twist. Elon's voice softened slightly. "I'm not here to embarrass anyone. I'm here because this moment, right now, is bigger than just me. It's about how we see people, how we judge them before we know their story." The room remained dead silent. Then he turned back to Margaret, locking eyes with her. "What I want to know, Margaret, is this. What exactly were you protecting this restaurant from yesterday?" Margaret felt her breath hitch. She wanted to say something, anything to defend herself, but she had no answer that wouldn't make her look small. Because, in truth, she hadn't been protecting anything, she had been protecting an idea of what she thought the restaurant should be. And now that idea was unraveling in front of everyone. The weight of Elon Musk's words settled over Delaney's bistro like a heavy curtain. Margaret Delaney stood speechless, her mind racing for a response, an explanation, anything that might justify her actions, but there was nothing she could say that would undo the moment. The reality was laid bare. She had judged a man not by his actions, but by an assumption. And now she was standing in front of one of the most powerful men in the world, being called out not with anger, not with outrage, but with a lesson that was impossible to ignore. The silence in the restaurant was so thick it was almost suffocating. Then, with the same calm demeanor he had carried since he walked in, Elon Musk turned slightly and gestured to one of the men standing beside him. The suited man stepped forward, holding a sleek black folder in his hands. The tension in the room shifted. Whispers spread through the crowd as people craned their necks to see what was happening. Elon took the folder, flipped it open, and pulled out a single sheet of paper. Then, in a voice that remained measured and firm, he spoke. "This is a donation pledge for $500,000 to Austin Community Meals." Gasps rippled through the restaurant. Margaret's eyes widened. She felt the breath catch in her throat as she stared at the paper. "I understand that this restaurant has been involved in supporting local food drives," Elon continued, sliding the document across the counter toward Margaret. "So I want to make sure that continues." For a moment nobody moved. Even the servers, who had been trained to remain composed no matter what, stood frozen in place. Customers exchanged shocked glances, their previous murmurs now replaced with stunned silence. Margaret's fingers trembled as she reached out and picked up the donation pledge. She scanned the words, her mind struggling to comprehend what was happening. $500,000. Her throat was dry. "Mr. Musk, she trailed off, her voice barely above a whisper. Elon offered a faint smile but didn't let her off the hook that easily. "You refused me service, Margaret," he said, "but that doesn't mean I can't do something good for this community." A few hesitant claps broke out from one corner of the restaurant, then another. Within seconds, the entire room erupted into applause. Margaret felt the heat rush to her face. This wasn't just about her mistake anymore. It was about the kind of person Elon Musk had just proven himself to be. And, more painfully, the kind of person she had just exposed herself as. The fallout from Elon Musk's visit spread faster than Margaret Delaney could have ever imagined. By the time the night was over, videos of the confrontation had already gone viral. Clips of Elon's speech, his calm demeanor, and the jaw-dropping moment when he donated $500,000 to Austin Community Meals flooded social media. Headlines popped up on every major news outlet. Elon Musk denied service at upscale Austin restaurant, then teaches a lesson on judgment. Restaurant manager faces backlash after turning away Elon Musk. Musk's $500K donation sparks nationwide debate on bias and assumptions. Margaret woke up to a storm of messages, calls from corporate, emails from journalists, and an inbox full of angry, supportive, and questioning comments. Her staff was uneasy. Some employees avoided eye contact, while others whispered in the break room, unsure if she would even keep her job after the backlash. Assistant manager Chris finally spoke up. "You didn't just turn away a customer," he said bluntly. "You turned away a lesson." Margaret felt the words hit deep. She had spent her entire career believing she was upholding standards, but now she had to confront the reality. She had misjudged someone not because of their actions, but because of an assumption. By the next day, the restaurant's reservation lines were flooded, not with customers wanting to dine, but with people calling to ask if they really had denied service to Elon Musk. Corporate headquarters had sent a stern email, reminding management of the importance of fair and unbiased treatment of all guests. But the hardest part wasn't the public scrutiny, it was the self-reflection. Margaret knew she had a choice: double down on her pride or take responsibility. That evening, she made a decision. She reached out to Austin Community Meals and volunteered to help distribute food, hoping to understand the impact of Musk's donation firsthand. She also called a staff meeting, addressing what had happened and encouraging her team to speak openly about bias, judgment, and customer service. Chris watched her carefully as she spoke. When she finished, he nodded. "Leadership isn't about never making mistakes," he said. "It's about learning from them." For the first time in a long time, Margaret felt like she was finally ready to listen. In the days following Elon Musk's visit, Margaret Delaney found herself at a crossroads. She had spent years priding herself on running a prestigious establishment, believing that her judgment was what kept the restaurant's reputation intact. But now she had to face the truth. Her judgment had failed her. Instead of retreating into denial, Margaret chose to own her mistake. She reached out to Austin Community Meals, the very charity that had received Musk's $500,000 donation, and asked how she could help. When she arrived at their food distribution center, she was greeted with a mixture of surprise and curiosity. Margaret rolled up her sleeves and spent the entire day preparing and handing out meals, listening to the volunteers and the people they served. For the first time in years, she wasn't the one in charge. She wasn't making decisions, enforcing rules, or controlling an environment. She was just another person, learning. Back at Delaney's Bistro, she called for an all-staff meeting. Instead of a speech, she started with a question. Have you ever made a judgment about someone before knowing their story? The conversation that followed was honest and uncomfortable. Her employees admitted to their own biases, their assumptions about certain customers, and the unspoken rules that had shaped the restaurant's atmosphere. Margaret listened. By the end of the meeting, she made a promise. They would do better. And for the first time, her staff believed her. The impact of Elon Musk's visit didn't fade. It only grew. What started as a single moment of judgment at Delaney's Bistro had transformed into a national conversation. Across social media, news outlets, and industry circles, people debated the lessons from the incident. Some sided with Margaret's initial decision, arguing that private businesses had the right to enforce their own standards. But most saw the bigger picture. This wasn't just about a restaurant denying service. It was about how easily people judge others based on appearances, assumptions, and personal biases. At Austin Community Meals, donations surged after Musk's pledge went viral. Inspired by his generosity, local businesses and individuals stepped up to contribute, allowing the charity to expand its programs. Within weeks, they were able to feed twice as many families, provide job training programs, and open a new food distribution center. The impact of one moment had rippled far beyond the restaurant's walls. At Delaney's Bistro, change was happening too. Margaret implemented new training sessions for her staff, focusing on unconscious bias, hospitality, and fairness in customer service. Employees who had once followed her strict selective approach now felt empowered to treat every customer with fairness and respect. Corporate leadership, initially concerned about the backlash, was surprisingly supportive of Margaret's efforts to make amends. Instead of firing her, they saw her commitment to growth as an opportunity for the entire company to learn. Margaret had turned a mistake into a lesson, one that was making her a better leader than she had ever been before. When reporters asked Elon Musk for a comment on the event, he simply shrugged and smiled. "I think the moment spoke for itself," he said. But for Margaret, the real moment came weeks later, when a familiar face walked into the restaurant. Mr. Caldwell, a longtime customer, approached her desk and handed her a small envelope. Inside was a handwritten note that read, "We all make mistakes, but humility is what turns them into lessons." Margaret smiled for the first time in days. She had been given a second chance, and this time she wasn't going to waste it. The story of Margaret Delaney and Elon Musk is a powerful reminder that judgment without understanding can lead to missed opportunities and regret. Margaret believed she was protecting her restaurant's image by refusing service to someone based on an assumption. She never imagined that the man she turned away was one of the world's most influential figures, someone who didn't seek revenge, but instead taught her a lesson in humility and fairness. Elon Musk's response highlights an essential truth. Real character is revealed in how we treat others, especially when we don't know who they are. His actions were not about proving a point, but about challenging a mindset, one that many people carry without even realizing it. Margaret's growth shows that true leadership isn't about never making mistakes, it's about learning from them. She could have doubled down on her actions, but instead, she chose to listen, to change, and to do better. Her journey reminds us that we all have biases, but recognizing them and working to overcome them is what defines personal and professional growth. In the end, the lesson is simple. Judge less, listen more, and always be open to learning. Because the person you underestimate today might just be the one who changes everything.